Hi, everybody. Welcome. So glad you're joining us. Welcome to panel number 6, titled Self-Care as Advocacy. We're so happy that you could join us today. My name is Sarah Rosenberg, and I will be moderating the panel as a volunteer for Emotions Matter. While I'm doing the introductions, we invite you to write in the chat where you're joining us from today. So welcome. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Introduce yourselves in the chat. Now I'm going to go ahead and share a slide deck, and we'll go through a few things before panelists. Okay. So Emotions Matter mission is that Emotions Matter is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2015 to support, educate, and advocate for those impacted by borderline personality disorder. Our vision is to create a world in which every person with BPD has access to treatment and resources to achieve a meaningful recovery. For more information, as you guys see, you can go to www.emotionsmatterbpd.org. Emotions Matters philosophies. Emotions Matters strives to create a safe, judgment-free space for people with borderline personality disorder. We accept that there's a spectrum of experiences within the BPD community. We honor where people are on the journey without judgment or assumptions. We encourage people to define their own path towards recovery. We speak as experts of our own lived experience, not as medical experts. Some guidelines for community engagement. Make sure you use respectful language in the session chat. Any inappropriate messaging, including harassment, bullying, or monopolizing the chat, will be deleted. We accept difference and promote acceptance, especially with regard to gender, identity, race, ethnicity, age, religion, disability, or politics. Avoid explicit expressions of self-harm or trauma, which may be upsetting to others. Panels and plenary sessions will be recorded and available after the conference. No screenshots or recording on personal devices. Last thing is important. Questions during the sessions should be asked using the Q&A box, not the chat. If you guys see, there's a chat tab, which you can put comments in, but we will be monitoring the Q&A tab for specific questions. Lastly, we have some safety guidelines and disclaimers. If at any time during BPD Fest 22 you find yourself overwhelmed, struggling, or for any reason in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to your support system. Audience members may experience intense and painful emotions, feelings, memories, thoughts, and/or reactions to content shared. Participate at your own risk. You're also welcome to take a break from BPD Fest 22 at any time or withdraw from it entirely. In the event of a medical, including mental health emergency, please seek emergency care through a doctor, hospital, or emergency call number such as 911 in the United States. All right, we're gonna get started. I'm gonna stop my share. We have 4 amazing panelists today. Super excited to hear from them. And I'm going to start with our first panelist, Caitlin MC. I'm going to introduce her. Caitlin MC is from Canada. She has self-published a book of poems and reflections on her lived experience. Caitlin writes about borderline personality disorder for the mighty. Take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really grateful to be here today to speak about self-care and advocacy from my lived experience. I used to define self-care as a set of positive activities that I would engage in to relax. While that is still part of how I see this, my understanding of self-care has also changed over time. Last year, I read a book by pediatrician and researcher Dr. Thomas Boyce entitled The Orchid and the Dandelion: Why Some Children Struggle and How All Can Thrive. His research was focused on children he studied into adulthood and not about BPD, although learning about his research and the metaphor he speaks of has been meaningful to my life as a person with BPD and has shaped how I understand self-care for me today. I will briefly explain the metaphor referencing Boyce on page 11 of his book. Some people are like dandelions and some people are like orchids. Dandelions can grow almost anywhere. They have a remarkable capacity for thriving in almost every environmental circumstance they encounter. On the other hand, orchids are exquisitely sensitive to their environments, especially vulnerable under conditions of adversity, but unusually vital, creative, and successful in supportive, nurturing environments. If you have cared for a real orchid flower, you know it can sometimes be challenging. They are a sensitive flower, needing special conditions to survive and thrive. I would describe myself as emotionally and interpersonally sensitive. Subtle things in the environment around me can affect my emotions. Like an orchid, caring for myself as a person with BPD requires specific planning, attention, and intention. Visualizing myself as the orchid and specific self-care practices as the light and nourishment needed for my own flourishing is how I understand and speak with you about self-care in my life today. A meaningful source of light and nourishment in my life is the self-care practice of writing. Writing a book about my experiences with BPD and having some of my writing published through an online mental health and disability community called The Mighty is one way I care for myself and advocate for others. Writing as a self-care practice helps me flourish.
It looks like we lost Caitlin there. Guess she's having some technical issues, and that's okay.
We are back. Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Welcome back.
Thank
Go ahead.
you. Rest, nutrition, and leisure. Self-care includes listening attentively to my body and honoring my own physical needs through rest and managing my specific nutritional sensitivities. Including some type of leisure activity in my life each day brings joy. Recent examples include reading, listening to music, coloring, and drinking coffee. Even for just 5 minutes, doing leisure activities are a way I can make choices and feel a sense of mastery. Psychotherapy and accessing support is part of self-care for me. The environment I require for flourishing includes support, just as an orchid cannot bloom entirely on its own. Scheduling support is a way I care for myself and cope effectively with stress. The way I organize the physical space at home is part of self-care. Putting my art and paintings on the wall that carry visual messages of hope and reminders of dialectical behavior therapy skills is how I make physical conditions of my home environment nourishing for me. Because I cannot always be at home, I also carry small images of my art with me in my purse, which I can take out and look at in the moment. So this is a way I adapt this self-care practice so that I can access a nurturing environment wherever I go. I cannot ignore these self-care practices in my life and expect to just flourish. Therefore, it is important for me to prioritize the practices I discussed, treating them as vital to-do items. It's not always easy to accept and honor my orchid nature. By that, I mean being truthful with myself and others about the importance of self-care, and that for me, flourishing is something that takes my attention and intention to create and maintain. Knowing where to start identifying what self-care could mean for you can feel daunting. If this is you, I may suggest beginning with asking oneself 3 questions, which I have found helpful. Number 1, what is just one activity that brings me joy? Number 2, what helps me safely cope with stress? And number 3, what do I value? What brings meaning to my life? It takes courage to proclaim oneself as being an orchid. Dandelions are a flower that can grow and thrive easily with less attention. While traits of dandelions are valuable too, Naming those traits as just not how I am is part of advocating for myself as a person with BPD and helping others. After decades of studying orchid and dandelion children, Dr. Thomas Boyce offers an important takeaway in his book, which I find helpful to relate to my own unique journey. He says, "Orchids are not broken dandelions. They are just a different flower." Are you more like an orchid too? If this does resonate with you, I invite you to consider that perhaps it is okay to be exquisitely sensitive, beautifully complex. As orchids, however, we may need to pay closer attention to what kinds of self-care are required for our own blooming, and then to intentionally add certain practices to our lives to maintain our recovery. We can do this, we can bloom. While not always easy, I recognize the beauty and potential of being an orchid myself. I see it when I care for myself through the self-care practices described today, and then I watch me truly flourish. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Caitlin. That was so beautiful and so touching. I'm amazed. I really appreciate you joining us today. And now I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Heather. Heather Dusler is a volunteer for Emotions Matter with their Caring Card program. She has been a mental health advocate for many years and has lived BPD experience. Heather credits much of her ability to manage her symptoms to self-care techniques and enjoys passing this information along to others. Heather, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to go through a few things with my self-care journey, and hopefully something will help along the way for you. One of my biggest deals with self-care, it's made me realize that I've had to take time out for myself. I don't normally do this, and I have a tendency to put everyone else ahead of me. I have learned over the years that doing that does not do anything for me physically or mentally. And if I don't take time out for myself, I do have a harder time managing my symptoms. Along this point, I have tried many different things. I have done therapy. I have read everything I can about my diagnoses. I have done DBT. I have written, I have done art, and I recommend all of these things. One of the biggest things for me, like I said, or like was mentioned in my introduction, was years ago, I was told to try journaling, and I'm not very good at it. Emotions Matter has a program called the Caring Card program, and I take time out, especially on my hard days, to write down the words that I need to hear from someone. And I put them into a card. I write these words down. And not only have I then told myself what I need to hear, I know that by donating these cards to Emotions Matter, they get sent to somebody else. So these cards will then go out, and I will never see this person. I will never meet this person. But I know that someone is getting words that they have needed to hear. And I hope that in that time, it brings them the same sense of help and hope that it did for me to write it that day. I have always had issues with my self-care. So if you are someone who struggles with it, I can tell you that I completely understand with that. It took me many years to come to terms with the fact that even if it was just sitting down and relaxing for a few minutes, turning everything off and listening to the quiet for 2 minutes, that helps. If you color or if you paint, anything like that, all of that is just a little bit of self-care, and it really does make a difference. On the same note, learn not to beat yourself up about it if you can't do it today or if you can't do it tomorrow. I have those days, so I completely understand. I do have to say, though, I can tell you, even if I have a day where I'm having a rough time and I haven't taken time out to do a breathing exercise, that I have learned over the years that I can tell by the end of the day. So even something just as simple as turning your phone off earlier at night can definitely help. I would say for me, the biggest form of self-care lately has been using it in help as self-advocacy for me. I am the type of person that will turn around and not stand up for myself. I will stay quiet when something doesn't work, and I will just have a tendency to listen to everyone. So I'm learning to use my self-care and myself to be an advocate for my treatment and say when things aren't working. Tell my doctor when something's not right. Ask a question if I'm in a peer group. There are so many ways that you can get different tips from people that you wouldn't even have expected, and it works. I will say that my biggest deal is being in a peer group and knowing that I'm not alone. And I may listen to someone that night that's on the other side of the world that has had the exact same day as I have. And using that the next day has definitely helped me out. My biggest advice for anyone when it's coming around to recommendations, if you're trying to find something that works or if you're struggling getting started, you don't have to do it all at once. I had to learn that. It took me quite a while to learn that I can't do breathing and yoga and color and write and all of that in one day. I have to pace myself. And it's okay. You don't have to fix it all at once, and you can't fix it all at once. But you can do a few more things one day than you could another, and that will help you further down the road. I recommend learning all you can about your diagnosis, learning different things you can about self-care. And if you have the ability to find a peer group and whatnot, do that. I recommend Emotions Matter. They were the first group that I found when I was diagnosed with my BPD, and the resources from the website and whatnot are very great. And that is really where I was able to branch out with the rest of my information. And I can honestly say that it has made a big difference in both my advocacy and my self-care. So I appreciate everyone listening, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I just want to give you an extra shout out for the caring cards. You are incredible, and we so appreciate the amazing, amazing cards you write. So thank you again, and thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next panelist. Our next panelist is Kristen. Kristen F. has valuable professional experience in both editorial and nonprofit, and she is currently hard at work on her MFA in creative writing. Kristen proudly serves as a peer support specialist for Emotions Matter and is an active member of our development committee. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi, everybody. I just want to give a shout out to my Emotions Matter team. I'm so proud to be here today. And I also want to give a special thank you to everybody in my support system that is here to attend the event, to learn more about BPD, and just to encourage me in general. I love all of you very much. So Sarah gave us 5 questions to address on this panel. And for me, that was the most accessible way to give my perspective and feelings on living with BPD. So I'm going to go ahead and read through the questions as well as my responses. Question number 1, why is self-care important to you on your recovery journey? If you had asked me 2.5, 3 years ago what self-care meant or looked like for me, I would have told you that it was just trendy lingo for daily kale salads and weekly mani-pedis that unfortunately I could not afford. Before my mental health crisis, it never occurred to me that I was the one responsible for my own health and well-being. From a very young age, I felt like I was partly, if not wholly, responsible for everyone else's. I put myself last on my priority list because I thought that's what you do to be a good person, to be accepted, and to be loved. In romantic relationships, I always thought putting my partner's wants and needs ahead of my own made me a better partner, more needed, more wanted, and more lovable. I prided myself on how many people in my life regularly called me selfless or empathetic, nurturing, mushy, sometimes even maternal. But it wasn't until my first major depressive episode and first hospitalization that I realized I'd never had a strong sense of self, that I've always struggled with my self esteem and my confidence, and that the sad reality of my situation is that a lot of the time I just plain don't care about myself or am able to properly care for myself. And as you can imagine, this is not something that is easy to admit when you're pushing 40. When I finally learned about what self care actually was, the look of my entire life started to change and is still changing today. Every new day brings challenges to help me learn a new skill or coping strategy. And in time and on my recovery journey, I've begun to create, as Marsha Linehan, BPD survivor and the creator of DBT or dialectical behavior therapy, would say, a life worth living. Question number 2. What kinds of self care have you used at different points on your recovery journey? How and why do you think they've helped? Once I finally, and honestly barely, clawed my way out of the pitch black, hopeless, suicidal hole that was my depressive episode, with the unwavering support and encouragement of my family, I re entered the world as a new but very weak version of my former self. Luckily, I had access to various therapeutic activities and medical care to bolster my strength and skill building on my BPD journey. I found a life coach, a spiritual advisor. I went back to yoga, something I had always loved and excelled at. I worked with a computer tutor to build skills that I thought might eventually help me go back to work someday. I began driving lessons because a car accident in 2007, a very severe car accident, had given me PTSD and a lot of anxiety around driving. I found 2 positions volunteering with animals as an adoption coordinator, as animal rescue is another passion of mine. And eventually, I was able to return to part time work and then full time work, and even to exploring the possibilities of a new love relationship, something I had given up when I left my marriage due to my time of crisis. Returning to grad school to complete my MFA in creative writing, I failed to complete my thesis 10 years ago because I didn't know that I lived with BPD and bipolar 2 disorder. So I didn't have the disability support services I needed to be successful in my program and earn my diploma. All of that will be different now as I return to school in the fall. Taking responsibility for my life and therefore my recovery has also become a number one priority in terms of the way that I approach self care today. Question number 3. What challenges did you face, if any, in engaging in self care? Has that changed over time? Personally, I've struggled with disordered eating from a very young age, specifically binge eating and then starving myself. I have also struggled with self harm. Mine comes in the forms of excoriation and very mild trichotillomania. I also made the very challenging decision to become sober because in the past I had recklessly abused drinking alcohol while taking my anti anxiety medication. These are behaviors that I manage on a daily basis. And in recovery, we say, keep it in the day. And that has been the phrase that I believe has kept me alive since I was hospitalized. The common phrase day by day um, often feels impossible to me. It's just not something I connect with. But for some reason, keeping things in the day really speaks to me. Question number 4. How is self care a form of self advocacy on your journey? I have become a peer group specialist facilitator with Emotions Matter since I discovered it through Support Group Central. And Support Group Central has been an instrumental part of my recovery. I've made amazing friends through the meetings I attend there, and I couldn't be more grateful or appreciative to Emotions Matter. It has been such a joy to become involved with them, and I just absolutely adore everybody that I work with. Um, Now I'm also pursuing my PCS training, which I'm looking forward to because I would love to facilitate groups, not just with Emotions Matter, but with other mental health platforms. Um, I volunteer with Emotions Matter in multiple capacities, excuse me. I take part in obviously facilitating meetings for others living with BPD. I contribute to the development committee, and I have recently started contributing to the social media committee. As I said before, I'm in a place now in my recovery where I'm able to return to grad school, which has been a life dream of mine to receive my MFA in creative writing with a specialization in poetry. And again, I feel like I'm finally in a place where I am taking responsibility of my life, learning to stand on my own 2 feet, and defining success in my own life on my own terms and not on life's terms. Question number 5. This is our final question. What advice or recommendations do you have for others who are struggling with self care or starting out with it? I have to admit that I'm not a fan of the word advice. I often use the words encouragement or support in place of it. Um, Self care starts with being gentle to yourself. To me, that's how I feel. I believe that um, showing yourself compassion is probably the most important or most effective way that you can do that. I follow Kristen Neff and Tara Brach very closely. They're both at the forefront of self compassion research. And as someone who used to work in both HIV, AIDS, and cancer care, and even with at risk teens at one point, there's nothing worse than experiencing compassion fatigue when you are generally or professionally prone to putting others before yourself because you just, as they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. And for me, that was my reality in my professional life. I went from nonprofit to nonprofit thinking that it was okay to operate from a place of chaos. I related to that, I think, based on um, trauma had experienced in my childhood, but it wasn't the place for me. Just because I'm a compassionate person and I want to help others, being in an environment where that is my job is not healthy for me. And that was a very difficult thing to accept, but I know that I'm in a better place because I have come to acceptance around all of that. Um, Self care began for me with creating a healthy daily routine. It began with me finding the right psychiatrist, which was not easy. It began with me making peace with taking medication every day, something I wasn't used to. It began with me realizing that I needed to prioritize my sleep. I had to um, eat healthier. I needed to exercise more. I needed to make sure that I was connecting with others on a daily basis. I needed to listen to my body and not the negative thinking that is constantly nagging me and the depression that lies to me every single day. Um, and 3 books that changed my life that we were able to add to the reading list on our website on Emotions Matter bpd.org are, and I have them here, Overcoming Borderline Personality Disorder, A Family Guide for Healing and Change by Valerie Poore. I think it's going to show up backwards, but this is what the cover of the book looks like. The next one is Loving Someone with Borderline Personality Disorder by Dr. Shari Manning. And the last one was actually recommended to me by one of my DBSA facilitators. It's called Self-Love. It's a workbook for women, but I know plenty of men that have used it and really enjoyed it and benefited from it. And that is by Megan Logan. And again, you can find these on our website. And again, I just want to thank everybody that is here today and open to learning more about the disorder that we live with every day. And thank you to our amazing moderator, Sarah. I love you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I love you too. And I'm so glad you're part of this panel. We don't have a lot of time, but we have one more amazing panelist. So I'm going to turn it over to Britney. Britney R Frank is a PhD candidate in medical anthropology and currently working on her dissertation research with adults who, like her, live with BPD. She is committed to advocating for the value of peer-led research while also serving as an active support in the BPD community, including as a peer facilitator for Emotions Matter. Britney, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks. When I still remember when I first heard someone talking about self-care. I was in a therapy group in the first inpatient hospital that I had checked into, and I was sure at that time this was most definitely not something for me. I remember like the images that came to my mind were like bubble baths and candles and like capital letters of like indulgence. I really wondered at that point, like how people expect me to pamper myself when I really hated myself, especially at that point. Like how could I care for a self that I really thought was worth it? Most of my life, I really focused on caring for others while disciplining myself. I learned very early on how to be hyper attentive to other people's wants and needs. First as a survival mechanism, but later it really, had become second nature. My life was about service to others, and I spent many years over abroad with the Peace Corps, and with my all or nothing thinking, this meant zero attention to myself if I was going to give attention to other people. I was very sensitive to criticism from others who said I was too needy, and so I kind of really overcompensated for that and tried to need nothing and become as small, also physically, and unnoticed as possible. By the time I ended up in the hospital, I really had to realize that this was unsustainable. This was not the way that I could relate to myself. That was when I was in my mid-30s, when I had my first major breakdown. And I had started my PhD program and had put everything of myself into that program, as I always did, not caring for myself. And the self-worth that I got from doing that was always, very fleeting. Everyone around me got very concerned, including my advisors. Eventually, I lost far too much weight, and that's when I first checked myself into a hospital and left the program. And that's the first place where I heard about self-care. And so I really had to realize that, that my life had just become far too chaotic. I had no control over what was going on, and I really needed to change things. But, the way I felt about myself didn't change when I made that realization. And so I think when I think about why self-care is important to me on my journey, I think it's because without it, it leaves no space for me, like having to leave my PhD program. It leaves no space for me to do the things that actually give me meaning in my life. And I also would notice that I had a lot of resentment towards the people that I never said no to because I overextended myself to be there for others. And when I think about like the self-care I've used at different points of my journey, I think for me, what I had to do was really reframe it. And so it really, at the beginning at least, and there's still a lot of that now, is changing the balance. So for me, like everything was so much self-hate, self-punishment, etc., that I really just had to think like, is there any way I can kind of change the balance and put a tiny bit less self-hate there and maybe add in one love thing or one thing that isn't self-hate. So at the very beginning, it just was like, can I say one less hateful thing to myself today? Can I do one less thing that punishes myself today? And it was very small steps at the beginning. So making my bed, that is still my number one self-care thing. That means I am getting myself to start my day on my feet, even if it's just for a few seconds. I have to get out of my bed and make my bed. And that means I'm going to give myself at least a few seconds on my feet in the world. And that became my marker for my mental health. So if I noticed I was going days without that, then I knew that like my self-care and my mental health was really going down. So another thing that I would do to change that balance would be hanging paintings on my wall. When I moved into my new place, I decided I wasn't ever going to buy something to put on my wall. If I wanted color, I had to make it. And so that got me to start painting again. And it was really like telling myself, even if I didn't feel like I deserved it, maybe one day I would feel like I deserved to have beauty around me, but I can put it on the wall anyway. Another thing for me was doing the dishes. I really believe like a bed is never just a bed. A dish is never just a dish, especially when you live with a disorder that makes it hard sometimes to want to do anything. And so getting myself up to wash one dish to me became self-care, because that was me choosing to do something that was towards life instead of what, everything inside of me was wanting to do. And also later, then I could start asking like, who is this self that this self-care is for? And trying to look emerged in my day and something I did that might be reflective of like the Britney that got covered up by everything, like the Britney that might shine through when I write a letter to somebody, the Britney that might shine through when I'm watering my plant. And so part of self-care was discovering what is this self that's part of self-care. I definitely, when I think of the challenges that I faced with self-care, I would say the hardest part was facing the self-hate. And I think for me, that's been the hardest part of my journey in general, is how I view myself. And also I think the bias I had against anything that sounded like I was being needy. So instead of being needy, I realized like I couldn't serve other people unless I was at least had my reserves for myself. I can't be resilient without those kinds of reserves. And how it's a form of self-advocacy for me, I would say getting back into my PhD program, being able to do research with people who live with this disorder and being able to get their stories heard. For me, it's advocacy, like it's a group effort. And there's no way I can be there for research participants without actually taking care of myself. Being a peer support to others, facilitating local support groups here. All of those to me are definitely forms of self-advocacy. So I think my recommendations for others who are struggling is to start off with making your bed every morning. It sounds simple, but it can be huge. Get a plant to care for, get a nice smelling dish soap to do those dishes with. I have a dry erase marker that I always write a message to myself on my bathroom mirror, like, good morning. Maybe if I'm feeling really nice to myself, good morning, sunshine. Making a schedule. I have to stay to a schedule if I am going to keep myself at least some form of stability.
Brittany, I apologize, but it's 1:24. We have, if you can wrap up, we want to have some time for Q&A. I apologize. We have a lot of amazing panelists, so go ahead.
Not a problem at all. I think I would just wrap up with, if it's really hard to imagine doing something positive, is to get to neutral. So for me, it's like, I'm not going to convince myself that I love myself today, but could I bring myself to neutral? Like, Britney, you are alive today and you are trying to like yourself and care for yourself. And so I've found a lot in just finding that neutral space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was amazing. I really didn't want to stop you. And we actually don't have any questions in the Q&A, but I know that people like to ask questions at the end. So please, audience, go ahead and ask questions in the Q&A tab at the top. Anybody else has anything, any last minute things they want to say? You guys can come back on camera.
Well, I just saw somebody who said something about having trouble starting a book. Like when I have so many books that I've gotten and I've tried to start, and I see this with a lot of my peer friends. We have accountability buddies, and I love accountability buddies because I will text one of them and be like, hey, I'm trying to start a new workbook. Can you text me every day at this time and just say, hey, did you do the page in your book yet? And so I have a whole bunch of people who are doing different accountability buddies with me, and it's helpful for them too to learn that skill.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There's a lot of great comments. People are definitely relating to what you guys are saying, and it's so incredible to hear from you guys. I'm really so proud that you're part of Emotions Matter. I do see a question. What is the most effective coping strategy you use? Anybody want to take that one? Nobody? Everybody gets shy now, huh?
I was going to say, I have a book that I keep. I have a really hard time when I'm in crisis. So as I've gone through things, mine has index cards that I've written out. So I have my distraction plan and like 5 steps. I have my relax and soothing skills and my 5 steps. For me, coping can be sticking my earbuds in and turning the world off. That is my biggest one. And I have that on there. I throw this in my purse. That way, when I'm not at home and I'm in crisis, I have my plan right here and it's immediate. And even if it means I go sit in the car and that's the only place I can be for 10 minutes until I can return to whatever I was doing, I've got it. So that does help.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I love that. We have time for one more question. The last question here is, do you have any suggestions or experience with reframing negative thoughts about self-care? For example, fears around self-care as selfishness.
I can speak to that, Sarah. I think that for me, I really had to come to terms with being okay with asking for help and leaning on my support system and even creating a support system for myself. Support groups changed my life. I think they saved my life in a lot of ways too. I have created, or I should say, I've been lucky enough to be a part of an amazing group of people that I've met through Emotions Matter and also through DBSA. And asking for help's not easy, especially when you're living with something like BPD, which is so difficult for even us to understand, not to mention our families, our significant others, our friends, our mentors, our bosses. Educating, having people who love you enough to educate themselves on our disorder is huge. I know that when I was diagnosed, I found so much power in education. And so I would just encourage people to educate themselves and have people who are willing to educate themselves for you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I'm so sorry I'm rushing, but we have 1 minute left. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to your questions. You can reach out to us by emailing us at info@emotionsmatterbpd.org, or you can click on the people button on the blue panel on the side and you can connect with our presenters. Just going to share one more slide real quick. Okay. So if you guys see the screen, we have an amazing walk for borderline personality disorder coming up on June 5th. It's going to be in person in New York City and virtual for anybody around the world. So please join us. And very important, if you are enjoying what you're seeing today, we really need your support to help offer programs like, conferences like this, programs for free to all our members. So please make a donation. There's a donate tab at the top of the lobby section of the conference. Please go ahead and make a donation. Your generosity will really, really help us support all those other people with BPD. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to the amazing panelists. We really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.